I choose Elena. The words rang through the grand obsidian hall, silencing the murmurs of the elite. Lisa felt the air leave her lungs. Her betrothed, Alpha Marcus, wasn't looking at her. His gaze, heated and resolute, was locked on her younger sister, Elena, who stood by the altar in a gown of spun silver. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Lisa whispered, the bouquet of winter roses trembling in her grip. He finally met her eyes, offering nothing but cold indifference. "I'm taking my true Luna. It was never going to be you, Lisa." A collective gasp echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The humiliation burned like acid in her veins. She took a step back, ready to flee the mockery of her own mating ceremony. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall didn't just open, they splintered inward with a deafening crack. The temperature in the room plummeted. A voice, low, lethal, and vibrating with ancient power, rolled over the terrified crowd. "She is not yours to discard, boy. Because she is mine." The morning of the ceremony had tasted of frost and anticipation. Lisa had stood before the towering vanity in her chambers, the heavy silk of her ceremonial gown pooling like midnight ink around her feet. For 5 years, she had prepared for this day. 5 years of studying pack law, of mastering the delicate political dances of the Crescent Moon Pack, of suppressing her own desires to fit the mold of the perfect Luna for Alpha Marcus. She had believed in duty. She had believed in him. "You look beautiful, Lisa," her mother had said. Though her tone was distracted, her eyes nervously darting toward the adjoining room where Elena was preparing. Elena, the golden child. Elena, who never read a book on diplomacy but could charm a rogue with a single pout. "Thank you, Mother," Lisa replied, securing the silver moonstone hairpin that marked her as the Alpha-elect's betrothed. "Has Marcus arrived from the borders?" "He has," her mother said quickly, smoothing her own skirts. "He went straight to the elders. Council business, I'm sure." Lisa had ignored the prickle of unease at the base of her neck. Her wolf, usually a quiet, steady presence in her mind, had been restless all morning, pacing and snapping at shadows. Lisa chalked it up to nerves. Now, standing at the altar with the shattered remnants of her future at her feet, she understood her wolf's warning. "Marcus." The High Elder's voice was a warning rumble. "The binding rights have been paid. The treaties with the Silverhand Pack rely on this union. You cannot simply—" "I am the Alpha," Marcus roared, his eyes flashing a dangerous amber. He grabbed Elena's hand, pulling her against his side. Elena looked up at him with wide, adoring eyes, though Lisa didn't miss the triumphant smirk that ghosted across her sister's lips when she glanced her way. "I will not bind my soul to a woman who is nothing more than a political tool. Elena is my chosen mate. The moon goddess wills it." It was a lie, and they all knew it. Mates were recognized by scent, by the soul-deep pull that eclipsed all reason. Marcus hadn't found his fated mate. He was simply discarding Lisa for the sister he preferred. The sister who wouldn't challenge him, who wouldn't demand he rule with wisdom rather than brute force. Lisa felt the hundreds of eyes on her, pitying, mocking, eager for her reaction. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. "Cry," the whispers seemed to urge. "Beg." Lisa squared her shoulders. The tears burning the back of her eyes were swallowed down into a cold, hard knot in her chest. If she broke now, she would never be put back together. She let the winter roses fall from her hands. They hit the marble floor with a soft, final thud. If the Alpha finds his honor in broken vows. Lisa's voice was terrifyingly steady, carrying to the furthest corners of the hall. Then I release him. May your reign be exactly what you deserve, Marcus. She turned on her heel, the heavy silk of her gown sweeping the floor. She needed to leave. She needed the biting wind of the winter woods, away from the suffocating stench of Marcus's betrayal and Elena's cloying perfume. She had only taken 3 steps down the aisle when the great oak doors exploded. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a cavern. Splinters of ancient wood rained down on the polished marble. The guards stationed at the entrance were thrown backward as if swatted by an invisible hand. The ceremonial music choked to a halt. The gasps of the crescent moon elite died in their throats as a terrifying aura flooded the room. It was thick, oppressive, smelling of ozone, deep forests, and impending violence. It was the scent of an apex. Through the settling dust strode a man who seemed to swallow the light around him. He was violently tall, his shoulders broad enough to block the exit entirely. He wore an immaculate, tailored black suit that looked completely at odds with the raw, untamed danger rolling off him in waves. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, swept back from a face carved from granite. But it was his eyes that stopped Lisa's heart. They were a piercing, luminous silver, the eyes of a predator who had found his prey. And they were locked dead on her. "Who dares?" Marcus began, stepping in front of Elena, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of dominance. The stranger didn't even look at him. His silver gaze remained fixed on Lisa, mapping every line of her face, every rigid muscle in her posture. The oppressive pressure in the room intensified until several weaker wolves dropped to their knees, gasping for air. I said. The stranger's voice was a low, resonant baritone that bypassed Lisa's ears and vibrated directly in her bones. "She is not yours to discard." He stopped 3 paces from Lisa. The distance felt both too far and entirely too close. Her wolf, previously thrashing in anger, suddenly sat dead still. A strange, terrifying warmth began to spread from her chest, blooming outward to her fingertips. "Mine," her wolf whispered, a reverent, terrified sound. "I am Alpha Marcus of the Crescent Moon." Marcus shouted, though his voice cracked slightly. "You are trespassing in my territory. State your name, rogue." The man slowly turned his head to look at Marcus. The movement was deliberately, terrifyingly slow. When he spoke, the dismissal in his tone was absolute. "Rogue?" The man let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "You are standing in a puddle, boy, and calling yourself an ocean." The High Elder, previously frozen in shock, suddenly collapsed to his knees, his forehead touching the marble. "Your Majesty," the old man rasped, his voice trembling violently. A collective shudder ran through the room. Majesty. There was only one man on the continent addressed by that title. A man of myth, of nightmares, who ruled the sprawling, brutal northern territories. The Alpha King. David. David turned back to Lisa. The lethal coldness in his eyes melted into something that made Lisa's breath catch, something fierce, possessive, and impossibly tender. He closed the distance between them, ignoring the room full of terrified wolves, as if they were nothing more than dust motes. He reached out, his large, calloused hand stopping inches from her cheek, waiting for her permission. "I have crossed 3 territories and slaughtered a dozen rogues to find you," David murmured. The words meant only for her. "I will not let a fool in a shiny crown take you from me." Lisa stared up at him, the scent of ozone and deep woods wrapping around her like a shield. "Who are you?" she breathed. His hand closed the final distance, his thumb brushing a stray tear she hadn't realized had escaped. The shock of his touch sent a jolt of pure electricity straight to her core. "I am your true mate, Lisa." David said, his voice a vow that resonated through the silent hall. And it is time for you to come home. The silence in the obsidian hall was absolute, save for the ragged breathing of 100 terrified wolves. Lisa stood frozen, the phantom heat of David's touch lingering on her cheek. The words, "true mate," echoed in her skull. A concept so foreign, so deeply buried in fairy tales, that her mind struggled to process it. Marcus, however, had processed enough to let his bruised ego override his survival instincts. Lies, Marcus spat, though he remained safely behind the altar. She is my betrothed. You cannot simply march in here and claim her, king or not. We have laws. David didn't turn around. He merely shifted his stance, and the oppressive, crushing aura in the room doubled. Several of Marcus's personal guard, who had tentatively drawn their silver blades, dropped them as their knees buckled under the sheer force of the king's dominance. Your laws, David said softly to Lisa, his eyes never leaving hers. Govern the weak who need rules to survive. I govern the continent. He finally looked over his shoulder at Marcus. The silver of his eyes seemed to glow, bleeding into the sclera as his wolf pushed close to the surface. You rejected her? David's voice was deathly calm. I heard it as I breached your pitiful borders. You chose the lesser sister. His gaze flicked to Elena, who shrank back, her smugness entirely replaced by stark terror. A poor choice, but a fortunate one for me. The bond you attempted to forge is null and void. I am the Alpha, Marcus stammered, desperation making him reckless. She belongs to this pack. You cannot take her without my consent. Lisa felt a cold, hard knot form in her stomach. Belonged, as if she were a piece of furniture to be traded or discarded at will. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him. The man she had spent 5 years bending herself backward to please now looked small, petty, and weak. Then she looked at David. The Alpha King stood as a bulwark between her and the pack that had just watched her humiliation without a word of protest. He offered no demands, only a shield. He's right, Lisa said. Her voice cut through the heavy air, sharp as glass. David turned back to her, a flicker of surprise, and something that looked dangerously like heartbreak, crossing his stoic features. Lisa, he's right that I belong to this pack. She continued, her voice gaining strength. She stepped out from the protective shadow of David's broad shoulders, facing Marcus and the elders. By birth, by blood, by years of service, I gave you my loyalty, Marcus. I gave you my youth and my counsel. She reached up and unclasped the heavy silver necklace that bore the crescent moon crest. It felt suddenly heavy, choking. To Lisa, don't be foolish, her mother hissed from the front row, finally finding her voice. He is the king, yes, but to leave your pack. My pack? Lisa let the necklace fall. It hit the marble with a sharp clatter that made Marcus flinch. My pack just stood silently while its alpha discarded me for a prettier face. My pack allowed 5 years of my devotion to be erased on a whim. She looked at Elena, who was gripping Marcus's arm tightly. You can have him, Elena, but you will quickly learn that a man who breaks his vows so easily will not hesitate to break you when a newer, shinier prize comes along. Elena paled, opening her mouth to retort, but a low growl from David silenced her instantly. Lisa turned her attention back to the Alpha King. The heartbreak in his eyes had vanished, replaced by a burning, terrifying pride. I, Lisa of the Crescent Moon. She spoke the ancient words of severance, the syllables tasting of copper and freedom. Sever my ties to this pack. I surrender my claim to these lands, to this Alpha, and to this family. I walk away with nothing but the skin I wear and the wolf within me. A physical shockwave rippled through the room. The breaking of a pact bond was agonizing. A tearing of the soul that usually left a wolf violently ill. Lisa felt the snap. A sharp, breathless pain in her chest. But it was immediately met by a surging, overwhelming warmth rushing from the man beside her. David's hand shot out, gripping her waist to steady her as she swayed. The pain vanished, swallowed entirely by the sheer power of the mate bond, knitting the fractured pieces of her soul back together. She is rogue now, Marcus sneered, though he looked pale and shaken by the severed bond. She has nothing. She is nothing. David moved so fast Lisa didn't even see him step. 1 second he was beside her. The next, Marcus was slammed against the stone altar, David's hand wrapped tight around the younger alpha's throat. The crack of the altar stone splitting echoed through the hall. "Do not ever," David snarled, his fangs fully descended, his voice layered with the demonic double timbre of his lichen. "Speak to my queen in that tone again." Marcus gagged, his feet kicking uselessly in the air. Elena screamed, a high, piercing sound, but she didn't step forward to help him. Nobody did. "David." Lisa didn't shout. She spoke his name quietly, testing the shape of it on her tongue. The Alpha King froze. Slowly, with immense effort, he reined in his beast. He dropped Marcus, who collapsed to the floor, gasping and coughing up blood. David straightened his suit jacket, not sparing the choking Alpha another glance. He walked back to Lisa, offering his arm with archaic, terrifying grace. "My queen," he said, his eyes softening only for her. "Our carriage awaits." Lisa looked at the ruined doors, at the shattered altar, at the family that had never truly seen her. Then she placed her hand on the Alpha King's arm. "Take me home," she said. The carriage was not a carriage at all, but a heavily armored black SUV that purred with suppressed power. It sat idling at the edge of the crescent moon borders, a stark contrast to the horse-drawn pageantry Marcus preferred for pack ceremonies. As Lisa stepped into the cavernous interior, the heavy door thudded shut behind her, sealing out the biting winter wind and the chaotic shouts echoing from the hall they had just left. David slid in beside her, his massive frame dwarfing the leather seat. He didn't crowd her, intentionally leaving a foot of space between them. Yet, the air in the cabin hummed with the electric tension of his proximity. The convoy lurched forward, tires crunching over frosted gravel. Lisa stared out the tinted window as the familiar pine forests of her childhood blurred past. She felt hollowed out, as if Marcus had carved out a piece of her chest and left only cold air behind. But beneath that numbness, a terrifying, pulsing heat emanated from the man beside her. "You are trembling," David observed. His voice was no longer the earth-shattering rumble that had brought the High Elder to his knees, but a quiet, observational baritone. "It's just the adrenaline," Lisa lied, refusing to look at him. "And the cold." Before she could blink, a heavy, dark coat was draped over her shoulders. It smelled intensely of him. Cedar, ozone, and that dark, intoxicating scent that made her wolf whine softly in submission. "I did not mean to overwhelm you," David said, staring straight ahead at the partition separating them from the driver. "I have spent my life learning to control my beast, but hearing him reject you, feeling your pain bleed through the bond across 3 territories. It took everything I had not to tear him limb from limb on that altar." Lisa turned to him, clutching the lapels of his coat. "How did you know?" "The bond, it usually requires physical proximity to snap into place." David finally met her gaze. The silver in his eyes had settled into a deep, stormy slate. "I am an apex, Lisa. My senses stretch further than normal wolves. But it was not just instinct. I have dreamt of you. Lisa's breath hitched. Dreamt? Not for 6 months, he confessed, the admission stripping away a layer of his formidable armor. I saw flashes of midnight silk, silver moonstone hairpins, and a mind sharper than a blade. I felt your frustration, your quiet suffering under a man who could not see your worth. He leaned in slightly, his gaze dropping to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. When I realized you were betrothed to the Crescent Moon Alpha, I mobilized my guard. We rode for 3 days without rest. I was nearly too late. The vulnerability in the Alpha King's confession struck Lisa harder than Marcus's betrayal. Here was a man who ruled half the continent, admitting to chasing visions across frozen wastes just to reach her. He didn't just reject me, Lisa whispered, the words tasting like ash. He chose my sister. He spent 5 years grooming me to be his Luna, and he chose the sister who spent those years mocking my dedication. Marcus is a boy playing at being a king, David replied, his jaw hardening. He wanted a pretty accessory who would nod at his decrees. He saw the fire in you, Lisa, and he was terrified of it. He knew you would eclipse him. Lisa closed her eyes, letting the truth of his words settle over her bruised pride. She had spent 5 years making herself smaller, quieter, more palatable for a man who still found her too much. I have nothing to offer you, David, she said quietly. I severed my bond. I have no dowry, no pack backing, no alliances to bring to the Northern Territories. David's hand moved slowly, bridging the gap between them. He gently cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing over her pulse point. I do not need alliances, Lisa. I have armies. I do not need a dowry. I own the northern mines. I need a queen who is strong enough to stand beside me, not behind me. I need you. The sincerity in his voice cracked the ice around her heart. For the first time since the morning had begun, Lisa didn't feel like a discarded tool. She felt seen. The Northern Territories were exactly as the legends described: brutal, breathtaking, and unforgiving. By the time the convoy crossed the heavily fortified borders, the gentle winter of the South had given way to towering, jagged peaks and forests buried under feet of pristine snow. The capital city, Winterfall, was built directly into the side of a massive mountain. At its peak sat the Obsidian Keep, a fortress of black stone and iron that looked less like a home and more like a warning. As the SUV ascended the winding road to the keep, Lisa felt a fresh wave of anxiety. She was a Southerner, trained in delicate diplomacy and tea-room politics. The wolves of the North were renowned warriors, hardened by endless border skirmishes and harsh climates. Would they accept a rogue from a disgraced pack as their queens? The convoy passed through massive iron gates, pulling into an expansive courtyard lined with hundreds of wolves. They stood in perfect, silent rows, their breath pluming in the freezing air. There were no colorful banners, no soft music, just the silent strength of an army waiting for their king. David stepped out first. The moment his boots hit the cobblestones, every single wolf in the courtyard dropped to a knee, bowing their heads in absolute submission. The silence was deafening. Lisa hesitated at the open door. This was his world, a world of raw, terrifying power. David turned back, his expression softening as he looked at her. He didn't order her out. He didn't offer a patronizing smile. He simply extended his hand, palm up, waiting. Taking a deep breath, Lisa placed her hand in his. The warmth of his skin grounded her. She stepped out of the vehicle, the heavy silk of her ruined ceremonial gown stark against the snow. A low murmur rippled through the front ranks. Lisa stiffened, expecting judgment. But as she walked beside David, she noticed their eyes. They weren't looking at her ruined dress or the absence of a pack mark on her neck. They were looking at the way David held her hand, the way his massive frame angled slightly, shielding her from the wind. "Presenting the king," a voice boomed across the courtyard. A towering man with a jagged scar across his face stepped forward. He was easily as large as David, his aura screaming of beta blood. "And his chosen," David amended, his voice carrying effortlessly. "Lisa, true mate and future queen of the North." The scarred man, David's beta Elias, dropped to one knee, lowering his head until his chin touched his chest. "Welcome home, my queen. The North honors you." Following Elias's lead, the entire courtyard echoed the sentiment in a deafening, unified roar. "The North honors you." The sheer force of their acceptance nearly knocked Lisa backward. In the Crescent Moon Pack, respect was bought with bribes and whispered alliances. Here, it was given freely, cemented by loyalty to their king. David led her through the massive double doors of the keep. The interior was surprisingly warm, heated by massive hearths roaring with eternal fires. Tapestries of ancient battles lined the black stone walls. "Elias will show you to our chambers," David said quietly, pausing in the grand foyer. "I must attend to the border reports. The southern packs are already whispering about what happened." Lisa felt a twinge of panic at the idea of being left alone, but she pushed it down. She was no longer a frightened bride. "Go," she said, her voice steady. "I will be fine." David looked at her for a long moment, his silver eyes mapping her face. "You are safe here, Lisa. More than safe. You are the highest authority in this keep, second only to me. If anyone gives you pause, you have my permission to deal with them as you see fit." He leaned down, pressing a firm, lingering kiss to her forehead. The scent of him wrapped around her, soothing her restless wolf. "Rest," he commanded softly, before turning on his heel and striding toward the council rooms. Lisa watched him go, a strange, new sensation blooming in her chest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't bracing for a blow. She was bracing for a beginning. 2 days passed in a blur of quiet luxury and simmering tension. The Obsidian Keep, despite its fearsome exterior, was a marvel of comfort inside. Lisa's days were spent exploring the vast libraries, familiarizing herself with the intricate history of the northern packs, and learning the brutal honesty of her new people. The northern wolves did not mince words. If they had a problem, they stated it. If they respected you, they showed it. Lisa found the lack of political maneuvering refreshing, though she still caught herself analyzing every conversation for hidden traps. A leftover habit from her 5 years with Marcus. David was a constant, solid presence. Though burdened by his duties, he made sure to take every meal with her. They spent their evenings by the fire, talking late into the night. Lisa found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing her dreams, her frustrations, and the quiet agony of being the lesser sister in her mother's eyes. In return, David spoke of the heavy crown he wore, the constant threat of rogues, and his unyielding determination to protect his people. But the honeymoon bubble was destined to burst. It happened on the morning of the 3rd day. Lisa was in the war room, studying a map of the continent, when David entered. The air temperature plummeted a good 10 degrees, his jaw set in a hard, violent line. Elias trailed behind him, looking equally murderous. "What is it?" Lisa asked, setting down her pen. David tossed a crumpled piece of parchment onto the massive oak table. "A missive from your former alpha." Lisa picked it up, recognizing Marcus's elegant, sloping handwriting immediately. She skimmed the contents, her blood turning to ice. To the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, your unprovoked attack on my pack and the subsequent kidnapping of my betrothed, Lisa, is an act of war. The Silver Hand Pack stands with me. Return her within the fortnight, or we will have no choice but to march on your borders to reclaim what is mine. Alpha Marcus, Crescent Moon. Lisa let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. Kidnapping? He discarded me in front of hundreds of witnesses. He is spinning a narrative, Elias grunted, crossing his massive arms. The Silverhand Treaty fell through the moment he chose Elena. They wanted an alliance with a disciplined Luna, not a pampered child. Marcus is losing face, and he's losing allies. He needs a scapegoat to unite the Southern Packs. He is trying to provoke a war to save his own pathetic ego. David snarled, his eyes bleeding silver. I should march my vanguard down there and burn his borders to ash. No. Lisa's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy scent of alpha anger in the room. David and Elias both snapped their attention to her. You cannot strike first, Lisa explained, moving to the map. Her mind, honed by years of political study, was clicking into gear. If you attack, you validate his claim. You become the rogue king who stole his bride. The other neutral packs will rally behind him out of fear. He wants you to react with violence. David stalked closer, his hands braced on the table, looming over the map. So, I let him spread lies about my queen? I let him threaten my territory? No, Lisa said, looking up to meet his furious gaze. You let him dig his own grave. She pointed to the borders of the Crescent Moon Pack. Marcus is weak. He relies on trade routes through the Whispering Woods, which are controlled by the neutral Ironclaw Pack. The Ironclaw Alpha values truth above all else. If we can prove Marcus broke the vows, if we can prove he chose Elena willingly and lied to the Silver Hands, he loses everything, Elias murmured, looking at Lisa with newfound respect. No one will trade with a vowbreaker. Exactly, Lisa said, but we need proof, something undeniable. Just then, a timid knock sounded at the heavy wooden doors. A young guard stepped in, looking pale. My king, forgive the intrusion. We intercepted a courier pigeon at the southern border. It carries a message sealed with the crescent moon crest, but it is addressed directly to the queen. Lisa frowned, extending her hand. The guard handed her a small scroll tied with a silver ribbon. She recognized the ribbon. It was the same one Elena had worn in her hair on the day of the ceremony. She broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. The handwriting was erratic, desperate. Lisa, please help me. He is not the man we thought. He is losing his mind. He hit me today. I know I wronged you, but please, you know the pack laws. You know how to maneuver. I am trapped. Elena, Lisa stared at the words, a cold knot tightening in her chest. The satisfying thrill of vindication she had expected was entirely absent. Instead, there was only pity, and the chilling realization that Marcus's ego was far more dangerous than she had calculated. She looked up at David, her jaw setting in a line of pure resolve. We don't need to attack them, David. They are already destroying themselves. The heavy oak doors of the war room remained sealed for hours as Lisa outlined her strategy. She didn't rely on brute force or David's terrifying reputation. She relied on the intricate web of pack laws she had spent 5 years memorizing, while Marcus had been out hunting. Alpha Silas of the Ironclaw Pack is an old blood traditionalist, Lisa explained, tracing the trade routes on the map with a slender finger. He despises oathbreakers above all else. If Marcus goes to him asking for safe passage for his troops to march north, Silas will demand a tribunal of truth to verify the claim of kidnapping. Elias, leaning heavily against the stone wall, grunted in approval. And Silas's truth seekers can smell a lie on a man's breath from a mile away. Exactly, Lisa said. We don't wait for Marcus to march. We petition Alpha Silas for a neutral summit at the Whispering Woods outpost. We present our case. We bring Elena's letter. David watched her, his silver eyes dark and unreadable. He hadn't spoken since she had laid out the plan, merely observing the sharp, calculating edge to her demeanor. You are asking to sit across a table from the man who humiliated you, and the sister who betrayed you only days after you severed your bond. I am asking to secure your borders without spilling northern blood. Lisa corrected gently, meeting his gaze. David pushed off the edge of the table, slowly closing the distance between them. Elias took the cue, bowing his head and quietly slipping out of the war room, leaving the heavy silence behind him. David stopped inches from Lisa, the heat of his massive frame radiating through the chill of the room. He reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly against her cheek. I do not care about spilling blood, Lisa. I care about the toll this will take on you. I felt your soul fracture when you left them. I will not watch them try to break you again. Lisa leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second as the scent of cedar and ozone calmed the frantic pacing of her wolf. They can't break me, David. Not anymore. Because I am not the quiet, obedient girl they engineered me to be. She opened her eyes, her gaze fierce. I am a queen of the North. It's time I acted like one. A slow, devastatingly proud smile spread across David's face. The sight of it made her breath catch. Then we ride for the Whispering Woods, he murmured, his thumb tracing her lower lip. And we let them hang themselves. The journey south took 2 days. This time, the convoy was not a single, sleek SUV, but a terrifying display of northern military might. 50 armored vehicles moved in perfect synchronization, flanked by a vanguard of shifted wolves whose dark coats blended seamlessly with the shadows of the pines. Lisa rode in the lead vehicle with David. She wore no silk or lace. Instead, the keep's tailors had crafted her a riding habit of black leather and thick wool, lined with silver thread. A heavy fur cloak, bearing the direwolf crest of the Northern Territories, rested on her shoulders. She looked formidable. She felt untouchable. When they reached the Whispering Woods outpost, a massive, neutral fortress carved out of ancient redwood trees, the atmosphere was already suffocating with tension. Alpha Silas, a graying, stern-faced man with a network of scars across his throat, stood waiting in the central courtyard. Behind him stood the elite Ironclaw Guard, unmoving and impartial. But it was the group standing across the courtyard that made Lisa's stomach knot. Marcus was there, flanked by his beta and a dozen poorly disciplined Crescent Moon guards. And beside him, swathed in a heavy, ostentatious fur coat, stood Elena. As the Northern King's vehicle came to a halt, the courtyard fell utterly silent. The air crackled, heavy with the oppressive dominance David exerted simply by existing. Lisa stepped out first. The gasp from the Crescent Moon delegation was audible. They had expected a broken, weeping rogue. Instead, they saw a woman radiating quiet power, the direwolf crest resting heavily over her heart. Marcus's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with a mix of fury and disbelief. But when David stepped out beside her, placing a possessive hand on the small of Lisa's back, Marcus physically took a step back, his bravado faltering under the Alpha King's lethal stare. The game had begun. The grand hall of the Ironclaw outpost was a stark contrast to the luxurious obsidian floors of the Northern Keep. Here, the floor was packed earth, and the walls were living redwood. A massive, circular table of petrified wood, dominated the center of the room. Alpha Silas sat at the head, his hands folded. "We are gathered under the ancient rites of parley," Silas's gravelly voice echoed. "No silver, no shifted fangs. Alpha Marcus of the Crescent Moon brings a charge of unprovoked hostility and kidnapping against King David of the Northern Territories. King David brings a countercharge of slander." Marcus stood up quickly, eager to control the narrative. "Alpha Silas, thank you. 4 days ago, my pack was celebrating my mating ceremony. Without provocation, the Northern King breached my borders, destroyed my ancestral hall, and forcibly abducted my betrothed, Lisa." Silas turned his sharp gaze to David. "A heavy accusation, Your Majesty. Breaching a southern border to steal a bride is an act of war." David didn't stand. He sat beside Lisa, relaxed, exuding the terrifying calm of a predator watching a trapped mouse. "I did not steal a bride, Silas. I claimed my fated mate. A mate who had just publicly severed her bond with the Crescent Moon Pack after being discarded at the altar. She severed it under duress," Marcus shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "He terrified her into it. I was fulfilling the Silverhand Treaty, taking Elena as my Luna because she was better suited for the burden. Lisa was hysterical." Lisa felt a cold, familiar rage pool in her stomach, but she kept her expression perfectly blank. She looked across the table at Elena. Her sister was pale, her golden hair lacking its usual luster. But it was the subtle scent that caught Lisa's attention. The sharp, metallic tang of fear, masked heavily by lavender perfume. Beneath the heavy collar of Elena's coat, Lisa's sharp eyes caught the faintest edge of a dark, greenish-purple bruise marring her collarbone. Marcus had lost his mind. He was taking his humiliation out on the only person left who couldn't fight back. Lisa stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. "Alpha Silas," she said, her voice clear and carrying perfectly in the acoustic space. "May I speak?" Silas nodded respectfully. "The floor is yours, Lisa. If I was hysterical, Marcus, it was an excellent performance," Lisa said calmly, turning her gaze directly on her former alpha. "Because I walked out of your hall of my own volition. You claim you chose Elena for the good of the pack. You claim the Silverhand Pack supported this change in the treaty." "They did," Marcus sneered. Lisa pulled a folded document from the inside pocket of her cloak. "Then you will not mind explaining this missive from Alpha Thorn of the Silverhand Pack, intercepted by Northern scouts yesterday. It formally dissolves their alliance with the Crescent Moon, citing, and I quote, the erratic and dishonorable conduct of Alpha Marcus in breaking a 5-year vow without council approval." Marcus blanched, the color completely draining from his face. That is a forgery. It bears the Silverhand wax seal, imbued with Thorn's magical signature." Silas rumbled, extending a hand. Lisa passed the document to the neutral alpha. Silas examined it for only a moment before nodding. "It is authentic." Whispers broke out among Marcus's own guards. They hadn't known. Marcus had been lying to his own people to maintain his grip on power. Furthermore, Lisa continued, stepping away from the table, her presence commanding the entire room, "you claim I was abducted. Yet here I stand, unbound, uncoerced, speaking freely before a neutral tribunal." She turned to her sister. Elena was shaking visibly now, her eyes darting between Marcus and Lisa in sheer panic. "Elena," Lisa said, her voice softening just a fraction. "Tell them." "Tell them what?" Marcus snapped, stepping closer to Elena. The threat in his posture was unmistakable. "Keep your mouth shut, Elena." David let out a low, vibrating growl that rattled the wooden cups on the table. "Let the girl speak, boy. or I will remove your tongue and speak for you." Elena burst into tears. She reached into her pocket, her hands trembling violently. But before she could retrieve whatever she was reaching for, Marcus snapped. The illusion of Marcus's control shattered completely. Realizing that Elena was about to expose him, and that his lies to the Iron Claw and his own pack were crumbling in real time, the Crescent Moon Alpha gave into the madness that had been festering since the altar. "You ruined everything," Marcus roared, his eyes glowing a sickly, erratic amber. He lunged, not at David, but at Elena. His hand raised, aiming a brutal backhand at the sister who was about to betray him. But Lisa was faster. Years of suppressing her instincts gave way to the explosive power of a northern queen. She vaulted over the corner of the petrified wood table, her shoulders slamming squarely into Marcus's chest before he could connect with Elena. The impact sent the Alpha stumbling backward, gasping in shock. Lisa landed lightly on her feet, placing herself directly between Marcus and her weeping sister. "Don't you ever touch her again," Lisa snarled, her own eyes flashing a brilliant, luminous silver, a reflection of the mate bond surging with David's power. "Treason!" Marcus screamed, scrambling backward as his claws fully elongated. He looked toward his stunned guards. "Kill them! Kill the Northern King! They are using witchcraft to control her." It was the desperate, pathetic cry of a broken man. But to Lisa's horror, a half-dozen of the men at the back of the room, men who wore crescent moon colors but lacked the scent of the pack, drew weapons. And the weapons didn't gleam with the dull gray of steel. They shone with the toxic, blinding white of pure silver. Rogues. Marcus had hired mercenaries and smuggled silver into a peace tribunal. It was the ultimate, unforgivable taboo. "Silver!" Silas roared, flipping the massive table upward to form a barricade as the first crossbow bolt snapped through the air. Chaos erupted. But the Northern King did not panic. He simply unleashed the beast. David moved like a shadow detached from the physical world. In the span of a single heartbeat, he bypassed the overturned table. The first rogue barely had time to aim his blade before David's hand snapped out, crushing the man's wrist with a sickening crunch. The silver blade clattered to the earth. Elias was right behind him, shifting mid-leap. The beta's massive midnight black wolf form tackled two rogues to the ground, his jaws securing their weapon arms in a bone-crushing grip that stopped just short of lethal. David had ordered no blood to be spilled, and his vanguard obeyed. Lisa didn't watch the fight. She grabbed Elena by the shoulders, pulling her behind the safety of the heavy wooden pillars. "Lisa, I'm sorry," Elena sobbed, clutching her sister's leather riding habit. He went crazy after David humiliated him. The elders started questioning him. He blamed me. He said I wasn't enough of a Luna. "Hush," Lisa commanded, her tone brokering no argument. She pulled the fur collar of Elena's coat back, revealing the ugly, blossoming bruise on her neck. Cold fury iced Lisa's veins. "You are safe now. He will never hurt you again." The skirmish lasted less than 40 seconds. When Lisa peered around the pillar, the 6 mercenaries were disarmed and pinned to the floor by the Northern Vanguard. Alpha Silas and his Ironclaw guards had surrounded Marcus, their spears leveled at his chest. Marcus was on his knees, panting, staring in horror at the silver weapons scattered on the floor. He had broken the sacred law of parley. There was no coming back from this. David stood over him, not a hair out of place, breathing calmly. He looked down at the crescent moon Alpha with nothing but utter disgust. "Alpha Silas," David said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the hall. "What is the penalty for smuggling silver into a tribunal of truth and attempting to assassinate an arbiter?" Silas's face was carved from stone. "Stripping of title, banishment to the wasteland, Forever Rogue. The Iron Claw Alpha looked at the remaining true Crescent Moon guards, who were staring at Marcus in absolute revulsion. Take this Oathbreaker to my dungeons. I will send word to the Crescent Moon Elders. They need to elect a new Alpha. Marcus didn't fight as the Iron Claw guards dragged him away by his armpits. His eyes were wide, empty, locked onto the floor. The arrogant boy playing king was gone, leaving only a broken shell behind. David turned away from the pathetic sight. His silver eyes immediately sought out Lisa in the shadows of the pillar. The violent, predatory aura around him instantly evaporated, replaced by that deep, anchoring warmth. He walked toward her, extending his hand. Lisa looked at her sister, still trembling on the floor. "Get up, Elena," she said softly. "You are coming north with us. We will find a place for you. But you will learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Elena nodded frantically, wiping her tears. Lisa turned back to David. She placed her hand in his, letting him pull her against his chest. She buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of cedar and ozone, feeling the steady, indestructible beat of his heart. They had won without a war. She had protected her people, saved her sister, and destroyed her abuser, using nothing but the truth. "You were magnificent," David whispered against her hair, his arms wrapping tightly around her. "My brilliant queen." 3 months passed. The brutal northern winter, which Lisa had initially feared, had become a blanket of peace over the obsidian keep. She stood on the sweeping stone balcony of the king's chambers, her breath pluming in the frigid, crystal-clear air. Below her, the city of Winterfall hummed with industry and life. The people didn't cower when she walked through the markets. They bowed with genuine, hard-earned respect. She was the queen who had outsmarted a tyrant and secured their southern borders without sacrificing a single northern soldier. "You're going to freeze out here." Lisa didn't turn around as the quiet voice broke the silence. Elena stepped onto the balcony, wrapping a thick gray woolen shawl tightly around her shoulders. The younger sister was almost unrecognizable from the pampered, golden girl who had stood at the crescent moon altar. Her hair was braided back simply, and her hands, once soft and manicured, bore the small calluses of someone who had spent the last 8 weeks volunteering in the keep's vast, geothermal greenhouses. "The cold doesn't bother me much anymore," Lisa replied, offering a small smile as Elena stepped beside her at the parapet. "It bothers me." Elena shivered, though she didn't retreat inside. She looked out over the snow-capped peaks. "The High Elder of the Crescent Moon sent another raven this morning. I saw it arrive at the rookery." Lisa's expression sobered. With Marcus banished to the wastelands, the Crescent Moon Pack had fractured. Without strong leadership or the trade routes Marcus had foolishly sabotaged, they were starving. "They are begging for annexation," Lisa said softly, stating the truth they both knew. "They want the northern territories to absorb them." Elena looked down at her hands. "Our mother wrote to me. She asked if I could put in a good word with you, to make sure they aren't treated as second-class citizens if David agrees." "And what did you tell her?" "I threw the letter in the hearth," Elena said, her voice steady, lacking the childish tremor it once held. She looked up, meeting Lisa's eyes. "I told her weeks ago that I am a citizen of the North now, and my loyalty is to my queen. I won't play their political games anymore, Lisa. I'm done being a pawn." A profound sense of closure washed over Lisa. The bitter resentment that had poisoned their sisterhood for years had finally burned away, leaving behind a quiet, tentative, mutual respect. "Thank you, Elena." The heavy wooden doors to the chamber opened, and the undeniable, electric presence of the Alpha King filled the room. Elena immediately bowed her head. My king, my queen, I will leave you to prepare. As Elena slipped back inside, David crossed the room and stepped onto the balcony. He didn't bother with a cloak, his internal heat radiating outward as he wrapped his massive arms around Lisa from behind, pulling her flush against his chest. Elias tells me the greenhouse workers are trying to promote your sister to a supervisory role, David murmured, burying his face in the crook of Lisa's neck, breathing in her scent. She found her own path, Lisa said, leaning back into his solid strength. She closed her eyes, savoring the grounding scent of cedar and ozone. What of the crescent moon petition? David turned her around to face him. His silver eyes were bright, stripped of the lethal coldness he showed the rest of the world. I signed the decree an hour ago. We are absorbing their territory. But I added a stipulation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy iron signet ring, the crest of a regional governor. They will not be ruled by a military general. They will be overseen by a diplomat of your choosing. You saved them, Lisa. You decide their fate. Lisa looked at the ring, the weight of his absolute trust settling over her. He wasn't giving her a token role. He was sharing his empire. You would trust me with the southern border? David brought his hand up, his thumb gently tracing her jawline. I would trust you with my life, my soul, and my kingdom. You are the brightest mind this continent has seen in a century. Marcus tried to bury your fire, Lisa. But all he did was teach you how to burn hotter. He stepped back, extending his hand. Come, the pack is waiting. There was no grand obsidian hall for their mating ceremony. The northern wolves did not believe in hiding from the elements when swearing themselves to the moon goddess. David led Lisa out to the summit of the mountain, a wide plateau of ancient, smooth stone. The entire pack, thousands of wolves in their human forms, stood in absolute, reverent silence under the night sky. Lisa wore no silk, no corsets, no delicate moonstone pins. She wore a stunning gown of deep crimson wool, trimmed in dark fur, a reflection of the formidable land she now called home. As they reached the center of the plateau, the sky above them began to shimmer. Vibrant ribbons of green and violet aurora borealis danced across the stars, casting an ethereal glow over the snow. Elias stepped forward, holding a single, heavy, silver crown forged to resemble intertwined direwolf fangs. David didn't take the crown from him. Instead, he dropped to one knee before Lisa, bowing his head in front of his entire army. The gasp from the newly arrived Crescent Moon refugees at the back of the crowd was audible. Kings did not kneel, but David wasn't a king ruling by fear. He was a mate claiming his equal. I, David, King of the North, offer my throat, my heart, and my crown to my fated. His voice boomed, echoing off the mountain peaks. I swear to stand beside you, never in front of you, to be the sword when you are the shield. Do you accept this bond? Lisa felt the tears finally spill over, but they were not tears of humiliation. They were tears of absolute, overpowering joy. The fractured girl who had stood crying at an altar in the south was dead. She reached out, taking the heavy silver crown from Elias. I, Lisa, claim this bond, she said, her voice ringing clear and true. I claim this pack. I claim you. She placed the crown on David's head. As he rose, he pulled her into a fierce, desperate kiss. The mate bond finalized, snapping into place with the force of a tectonic shift. A wave of pure, luminous energy rippled outward from them, making the aurora above flare brilliantly. A deafening roar erupted from the thousands of wolves surrounding them, a war cry of celebration that shook the very foundations of the mountain. Lisa broke the kiss. resting her forehead against David's, both of them breathless. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the sister who smiled genuinely from the front row, at the vast, beautiful, brutal kingdom that was now hers. She had lost a boy who didn't know her worth. But she had gained a king who worshipped the ground she walked on, and a kingdom she would rule until her dying breath. In the end, true power isn't found in cruelty, deception, or the desperate need to control others. True power is recognizing your own worth when the world tries to tell you you have none, and having the courage to walk away from a table where respect is no longer being served. Lisa's journey from a discarded, dutiful bride to a fiercely strategic and beloved queen proves that sometimes the greatest betrayals are simply the universe's way of clearing the path for your true destiny. If you were captivated by Lisa and David's journey of betrayal, strategy, and fated love, please like this story, share it with your fellow romance readers, and subscribe for more cinematic, tension-filled, dramatic fiction. What was your favorite moment of the Alpha King's revenge? Let us know.